He renamed the lake after his dog, the same dog the HOA tried to ban, framed as dangerous and nearly erased from the neighborhood's history. And the day they unveiled their luxury dog spa that excluded service animals, he stepped on stage and said just 6 words: "I own this lake now. Leave." This isn't just a story about rules. It's about loyalty, sacrifice, and the price of erasing a hero. If you believe some dogs deserve more than fences and fines, like, comment where you're watching from, and follow to see how one forgotten German Shepherd brought a whole community to its knees, and then healed it. The moving truck rumbled quietly away from the curb, its groaning engine finally fading into the distance as Jamal Everett stood alone on the porch of his new home. The late autumn sun hovered low in the sky, casting long shadows across the neatly trimmed lawns of Brookhaven Ridge, a neighborhood that looked like it had been peeled straight from a real estate magazine. Rows of identical homes lined the winding streets, each one boasting pale stucco, matching shutters, and mailboxes that gleamed like polished trophies. Jamal exhaled slowly. This was supposed to be the beginning, a reset, a quiet chapter after the storm. Behind him, the front door creaked open, and a heavy sound of paws thudded softly against the hardwood. Ranger emerged tall, powerful, and alert. His black and tan coat glistened in the soft afternoon light, his dark eyes scanning the perimeter with calm focus. Unlike the sprawling military bases or the burning desert roads they'd once patrolled together, this world felt almost... Jamal reached down and absently scratched behind his ear. "We made it, buddy," he said. "It's not Kandahar, but I guess it'll do." Ranger let out a low woof in reply. Jamal had chosen Brookhaven Ridge because of the lake. It was tucked in the center of the neighborhood, ringed with willows and a short wooden dock. Rachel had always wanted a house near water and said it calmed her chemo headaches. Now, with her gone 6 months and the war behind him, this seemed like the one place quiet enough to breathe again. He was ready to live for real now, not just survive, but even in silence, something felt off. A few neighbors watched from their porches as he unloaded the final few boxes from his pickup. An older woman paused her pruning mid-snip and squinted at Ranger, her brows pulling together slightly. Jamal offered a small nod, a polite wave. She didn't wave back. By evening, Jamal had set up the bare minimum inside bed, coffee maker, and a framed photo of Rachel in her headscarf holding a laughing Ranger in their old backyard. They'd both been thinner then, happier. He let himself sit down for the first time all day, sighing as he unlaced his boots. Ranger curled beside the sofa, eyes half-lidded but ears still flicking at every sound outside. The knock came just after dusk. 3 short raps, spaced evenly. Jamal opened the door to a tall man in a gray HOA windbreaker, a clipboard in hand and a forced smile stretched across his narrow face. "Good evening, Mr. Everett, right?" the man asked. Jamal nodded. "That's me. I'm Aaron from the Brookhaven Ridge Homeowners Association. Just wanted to stop by and welcome you to the community. I see you have a dog?" Jamal glanced down at Ranger, who stood quietly behind his leg. "Yeah. That's Ranger." Aaron's smile twitched. "Ah, well, we just like to make sure all residents are familiar with the HOA guidelines regarding pets. We strongly discourage large breed dogs, particularly those over 60 pounds. Jamal raised an eyebrow. "You discourage them? I didn't see anything about breed or size restrictions in the documents I signed." "Well, technically, there's no outright ban," Aaron replied, flipping through his clipboard. "But it's become community expectation. You understand?" "You?" Jamal said calmly. "I don't think I do." Aaron cleared his throat. "It's not just about weight. Some residents find certain breeds intimidating, especially..." He hesitated, his eyes flicking to Ranger. "Military breeds, there have been incidents. Concerns about safety." Ranger stood still, tail low, not a muscle twitching. "Ranger is trained better than most humans I know. He's never harmed anyone." Aaron offered a hollow chuckle. "I'm sure he's wonderful, but people can be nervous. If you could just keep him away from the lake path problem, that's where a lot of our families and children go to unwind. Maybe keep walks to the sidewalk zones. Less proximity." Jamal stared for a long beat, then smiled politely. "I'll walk him where the leash allows. Thanks for the visit." "Welcome again, Mr. Everett. You'll find we value harmony here at Brookhaven." When the door clicked shut, Jamal leaned back against it and let out a slow breath. That didn't take long. The next morning, a printed warning notice was tucked into his mailbox. Infraction notice. Violation of HOA Animal Courtesy Code. Unleashed dog observed near lake path. Fine, $100, 0 cents. Jamal laughed aloud. He remembered the walk clearly. Ranger had been leashed the entire time. They'd passed 2 children playing with scooters and a woman jogging, none of whom had even looked at them twice. But someone, somewhere, had decided that Ranger's presence, his size, his breed, or maybe just his black fur was a threat. He folded the notice and slipped it into a drawer. He wasn't new to this game. They'd just picked the wrong soldier to corner. Later that week, Jamal took Ranger to the lake at dawn, long before any strollers or joggers showed up. Mist floated across the water's surface like breath. Ranger sat quietly beside him as Jamal cast a stone into the shallows. It skipped 3 times, then sank. "I'm not here to fight," he told the still air. "I'm not leaving either." Ranger turned his head, nudging his shoulder with quiet understanding. Across the lake, a pair of eyes watched from behind a second fence. 3 mornings after the first violation notice, Jamal stepped out onto the porch with a mug of black coffee and a leash in hand. The neighborhood was still cloaked in the pale hush of early light, dew coating every blade of grass, every white-trimmed mailbox along the gently curving street. Ranger, already alert and by his side, let out a soft chuff as Jamal murmured, more to himself than to the dog. But he knew the truth. Invisibility had never been an option for men like him. The path to the lake was clear, and as they walked, Jamal kept his movements measured, his gaze calm. He knew where every HOA security camera was mounted, even if they were disguised as simple lampposts or placed in trees. It wasn't paranoia. It was instinct, sharpened by years of walking into unknown villages with insurgents behind walls. But here, in this upper-middle-class enclave, it wasn't rifles he had to worry about. It was whispers. It was paperwork. Ranger did what he always did. Walked precisely to heel, ears high but body relaxed. They passed the Willowland Trail that edged the lake and paused beside a tree where other dogs had clearly relieved themselves. Jamal allowed Ranger to sniff, and after a short pause, the dog lifted his leg and urinated on the bark, an act as natural as breathing for any animal. Jamal had a bag and gloves ready, even though it wasn't necessary. He cleaned up the small patch of grass where Ranger had trodden and moved along, thinking nothing of it. That evening, the envelope was taped to his front door. Thick white paper, red ink. Infraction Eunice Unite and Community Green Space. Location Oak 14 Southern Lakeside Path. Fine $700, 0 cents. Violation code 3.2b Environmental impact from pet waste. Jamal stood on his porch for a long time, reading and rereading the notice, fingers tightening along the paper's edge. The words blurred slightly as disbelief curled into his chest. He turned the page over, expecting to see some photographs, some time-stamped evidence. But there was nothing except a line at the bottom. All infractions processed under the authority of HOA President Celeste Whitmore. That was the first time he saw the name, Celeste Whitmore. He went inside and set the paper on his kitchen table, beside a file folder where he'd already started storing the notices, typed correspondence, and community rulebook. Rachel used to call it his paper trail playbook, back when they were fighting for disability approval from the VA. He hadn't needed it in a long time. Now, he reopened the folder and slid the new violation into a fresh plastic sleeve. The next morning, Jamal requested a formal review. The HOA office replied within 4 hours with a templated email. Reviewed and upheld. Video surveillance confirms the incident. Further appeals will not be processed unless presented in writing by certified legal counsel. That night, Jamal walked Ranger near the lake again, deliberately choosing a different path, far from the scene of the so-called incident. As they returned home, he noticed a woman standing near his mailbox, a thin silhouette in a tailored gray coat, her platinum hair swept into a bun that didn't move in the wind. She was speaking with another resident, but her eyes followed Jamal's every step. The following week, a new announcement appeared on the Brookhaven Ridge HOA website and bulletin board. It was posted without warning or discussion. Notice of Policy Guidelines. Animal Activity on Animal Restitution. Within the borders of the Brookhaven Ridge approved breed list, may access the lakeside trail or surrounding green space. The list, published beneath the notice, included 15 breeds: golden retrievers, labradors, poodles, small doodle mixes, bichons, spaniels, and a handful of designer hybrids. German shepherds were not among them. Neither were pit bulls, rottweilers, huskies, or dobermans. Jamal reread the notice under the flickering light of the community board. Several people passed behind him, murmuring about the new safety policy. Grateful the board was finally cracking down. One woman even clapped her hands quietly and whispered, "Celeste always knows how to keep things orderly." Mad Jamal walked home slowly that evening. His boots crunched the sidewalk with each step, and Ranger stayed close to his leg, sensing the tension that now coiled around his owner's spine. At home, Jamal brewed coffee he didn't drink and sat at the table with the policy notice. He highlighted several lines, underlined others. Then he flipped to the back of the HOA handbook, last printed in 2015, and saw no mention of any approved breed list clause. He opened a new document on his laptop and began to draft. Not a protest, not a threat. A record, a date-stamped log of every incident, every message, every fine. That weekend, he took Ranger out before dawn and walked the exact loop they always had. This time, he recorded it. Body cam, phone footage, timestamps. Ranger was flawless, he always was. But when they returned home, there it was again. The third notice. This one stated that Jamal had violated the new policy twice within a 7-day period, and would be placed under review for repeated defiance of community standards. That night, as Ranger lay quietly beside the sofa, Jamal stared at the ceiling and remembered the way Rachel used to squeeze his hand during medical appointments, not to comfort herself, but to steady him. "They can't bear you in paperwork if you own the ground they're standing on," she once told him with a smile. It had sounded like a joke then. Now it felt like prophecy. The next morning, he walked Ranger on the far side of the neighborhood, away from the lake, past the development lots still waiting for new homes. There were no cameras out here. No HOA signs. Just an old maintenance road that looped into a patch of unclaimed woods. But Ranger stopped, stiffened, nose up, ears twitching. Then he growled, not loud but deep, focused. Jamal crouched beside him. "What is it, boy?" he asked. Ranger padded forward slowly, stopping beside a storm drain near the edge of a slope. Jamal followed, frowning. There was a scent chemical, bitter sharp, in the back of the throat. It burned slightly, and something else glinted faintly in the dirt. A small plastic tag. It read, HTMRE, Lot 12 Prep Complete. Jamal turned it over. On the back, a smudged timestamp and one phrase in faint black print. Property transfer pending. His brow furrowed. Lot 12 wasn't near any homes. It bordered the lake itself, a chunk of land he'd assumed was still part of the green space. Why would it be marked for transfer? Why would the soil smell like chemicals? He pocketed the tag and stood in silence. Ranger sat beside him, alert, unwavering. Behind them, back toward the manicured lawns and pristine fences, a voice rang out, soft but pointed. "I'd be careful wandering off trail like that, Mr. Everett. Wouldn't want to get lost." Jamal turned slowly. Celeste Whitmore stood at the path's mouth, holding a clipboard, her smile razor thin. That night, after Celeste's warning on the trail and that plastic tag pocket like evidence, Jamal couldn't sleep. His mind kept circling the words "prep completely," replaying her perfectly measured smile, her polished boots standing precisely at the edge of his world. Ranger lay still at the foot of the bed, breathing slow and even, but his ears twitched at every creak from the hallway, every gust outside the window. At 2:37 a.m., Jamal woke with a start. No nightmare, just a sharp, low sound, the kind of growl Ranger hadn't made since Afghanistan. Jamal reached for the flashlight on his nightstand and whispered, "You hear something?" Ranger was already on his feet, posture rigid, nose pointed toward the back door that faced the lake. Jamal rose carefully, his body remembering instinct long before thought caught up. He walked through the darkened house, stepping around boxes he hadn't yet unpacked, peering through the side window. Moonlight silvered the yard. Nothing moved, but Ranger stood beside the doorframe, muscles tense, his growl rising in steady pulses. Jamal unlocked the back door and opened it slowly. Cool air rushed in. Ranger stepped forward, silent now but tracking something invisible in the wind. The night was dead still, but the silence felt loaded. The next evening the pattern repeated. Around 2:00 a.m., Ranger growled again, this time pacing by the sliding door, tail held low, movements sharp and coiled. Jamal followed him outside with a flashlight and scanned the backyard. No animals, no people. But as they neared the property edge, Ranger stopped beside the low fence that separated his yard from the narrow wooded slope down to the lake. He leaned his head forward, sniffed hard, and then sneezed once, twice, before backing up with a faint whimper. Jamal crouched beside him. The air had an odd bite to it, a sour chemical tang like spoiled pool water mixed with iron. He rubbed Ranger's neck and looked out across the trees toward the lake. The water sat flat and black in the distance, but Jamal's gut told him something was off. On the third night, Jamal prepared. He set up an old trail camera he'd used on hiking trips, positioning it just outside the fence line facing the path toward the lake. He placed it high enough not to be easily spotted but angled down to catch any movement that came through the trees. If someone was walking this route, he'd get it. If not, well then at least he'd have proof that whatever was disturbing Ranger. That night he barely slept. At 4:23 a.m., the camera clicked once, triggered by motion. By morning, Jamal retrieved the SD card and plugged it into his laptop. The footage was grainy, tinged green from night vision, but clear enough. At 4:23, a dark shape moved low through the trees, too small for a person, too coordinated for a raccoon. It paused at the edge of the lake, then disappeared toward the dock. Jamal rewound and zoomed. The shape wasn't an animal. It was a human, crouched, carrying something bulky in both arms. He sat back, a chill threading down his neck. That wasn't someone out for a jog. That was someone trying not to be seen. The next day, a new problem surfaced literally. Jamal was walking Ranger near the lake in the early morning when he noticed a cluster of residents gathered at the end of the dock. A few were kneeling, pointing into the water. As he approached, a woman clutched her nose and said, "It reeks. Ugh, like sewage." Another man, crouched in a gray hoodie, reached forward with a pool net and pulled something from the surface. A fish. Dead. Belly up. White scales glinting. More followed, dozens floating along the reeds, some half-submerged, others bobbing listlessly in the current. "Gross," one team said. "Are those poisoned?" Celeste appeared 10 minutes later, crisp as always in her tailored coat and pearls, clipboard tucked beneath her elbow. She surveyed the scene with pursed lips. Then, slowly, she turned toward Jamal. "Mr. Everett," she called out, voice polite but cutting, "you're out early." Jamal met her gaze squarely. Same as usual. She took a few steps forward. Versus. "He's concerned about the environmental impact on our community lake. Quite serious, actually. Dozens of fish dead. Some residents have reported a strong chemical odor in the air at night." She paused, letting the words settle. "You haven't noticed anything?" "I've noticed a few things," Jamal replied calmly. "You understand this," he said, her tone taking on a sharper edge. "There's speculation that pet waste might be contributing. In fact, a neighbor shared images of your dog near the lake's edge, not long before dawn." Jamal's jaw flexed. Ranger doesn't relieve himself anywhere without command. He's trained. Military-level trained. "Still," she replied, faux sympathy coating each syllable, "even trained." Jamal didn't respond. Instead, he crouched beside Ranger and whispered something. The dog sat instantly, posture perfect, gaze forward. Jamal looked back up. "That's not unpredictability, that's discipline." Celeste smiled, thin and humorless. "We'll be investigating all possible causes. I hope you'll cooperate fully." That evening, another envelope arrived on his doorstep. Infraction notice, suspected environmental contamination due to pet activity. Preliminary fine $500.00. Pending full HOA review and community hearing. Jamal didn't speak as he opened the notice. He read every line, every clause, and then added it to the folder, now growing thick with documentation. He flipped back to the camera footage again. The figure from the woods had passed within 20 feet of the lake, closer than any dog. But Celeste hadn't mentioned nighttime trespassers. She'd only talked about pets. He returned to the site that night, walked the lake perimeter slowly, flashlight in hand, Ranger pressed to his side. By the old dock, he saw it just beneath the surface, a clear plastic bag half submerged in the shallows, tangled in lake weeds. He reached down, scooped it up carefully, and opened it. Inside were 3 unlabeled canisters. The plastic warped, lids rusted. One had already leaked. The inside smelled acrid, sharp, and sterile like old hospital chemicals. He dropped it into a Ziploc and sealed it tight. He didn't call the HOA, he called someone else. Someone who owed him a favor. Jamal didn't sleep that night. Not after sealing the bag with the leaking canisters. Not after that scent, bitter and unnatural, clung to his skin long after he washed his hands. The favor he'd called in was a quiet one. A voice from his time overseas. Someone who now worked in environmental inspection for the county. The man didn't ask many questions. Just told Jamal to leave the sample behind his garage in a locked cooler. And by sunrise it was gone. Ranger watched the entire exchange from the back door, tail twitching, ears flicking at every sound like radar scanning an incoming threat. Jamal trusted that instinct more than he trusted anything written on HOA. The next evening, Jamal drove 30 minutes into the city and bought 2 more trail cameras, higher resolution, smaller profile, with Wi-Fi capabilities that allowed real-time uploads to cloud storage. He didn't care about HOA bylaws anymore. This was reconnaissance now. This was a mission. He scouted the lake perimeter carefully that afternoon, pretending to take photos with his phone, but in truth marking sightlines, tree cover, and potential approach angles. By dusk, the cameras were placed. One mounted in a cedar tree that overlooked the west end of the lake where the dead fish had first appeared. Another hidden inside a hollow PVC pipe near the maintenance shed, positioned low to catch anything that moved along the shore. Jamal tested the feed. Everything was live. Then he waited. 3 nights later, at 2:11 a.m., his phone buzzed. Emotion alert. He slid out of bed, heart already pounding, and opened the camera feed. The west tree cam had triggered. For a moment, there was nothing but wind in the branches, then movement. A figure, hooded, slim build, walking fast, half crouched, carrying something in both arms. They approached the waterline, turned, and for a split second, the night vision caught a glimpse of the face. Jamal knew that face. She sat 2 seats left of Celeste during every HOA board meeting he'd ever seen online. Her name was Meredith Stone, a realtor and one of the longest-standing board members. He'd overheard her at the summer block party bragging about closing 5 houses that quarter. Now, there she was, dumping the contents of 2 containers into the shallows and walking away like it was nothing. The camera caught it all. Jamal downloaded the footage, edited nothing, and copied it to 3 separate drives. One for himself, one for the inspector, and one he slipped into a fireproof lockbox beneath his bed. Then he printed still frames, time-stamped and labeled. He wrote a short summary in bullet points, just like his mission briefs from the military. Subject: Meredith Stone, HOA Board. Action: depositing unknown liquid into community lake at 2:11 a.m. Environmental impact observed. Mass fish death within 36 hours of prior incident. Legal status of lake ownership: unconfirmed. He paused at that last line. Unconfirmed. It was time to fix that. The next day, Jamal visited the county registrar's office. He wore a button-up shirt, jeans pressed flat, no backpack or briefcase. He approached the counter and requested the property record for parcel 811 Lakeview. Known as the clerk, an older man with a receding hairline and kind eyes, tapped on his keyboard, glanced once at Jamal, then handed him a stapled printout. "That one's interesting," he said. "Been leased for decades, but technically still owned by a company that doesn't operate around here anymore." Jamal thanked him and left without speaking further. In the truck, he read the papers line by line. The lake, as it turned out, was not owned by the Brookhaven HOA. It was leased from a private developer, Clearstone Property Group. The lease was signed 30 years ago with a renewal clause every 10 years. The current lease was set to expire in less than 60 days. He flipped the page. There was no clause transferring permanent ownership to the HOA, no option to buy, just a pending renewal, unsigned. Jamal stared at the final line, where the contact for Clearstone was listed. A P.O. box in Atlanta. An email that bounced back when he tried it. A disconnected phone number. So the HOA didn't own the lake. That changed everything. He returned home and pulled the Brookhaven Ridge Community Charter from his kitchen drawer. It was printed in glossy color, filled with photographs of happy families, neatly mowed lawns, and staged holiday events. Page 36 was titled, Community Resources and Common Grounds. There it was again, Brookhaven Lake listed as a community amenity. No mention of a lease, no mention of Clearstone, just vague language about protected natural space maintained through HOAs. He sat back, rubbing his jaw. It wasn't just a lie, it was a cover. They'd written the lake into their branding, used it to sell homes, but never disclosed that they didn't actually control it. Felicit had weaponized a resource that legally wasn't even hers. He added the lease record to his folder, then pulled up the HOA's annual budget report, which was publicly available through the resident portal. There were line items for lake maintenance, but no invoices, no contractors listed, no proof that they had actually paid for anything besides signage and a few benches. The deeper Jamal looked, the more rotten the foundation seemed. That evening, he walked the loop around the lake again, this time not with Ranger but alone. He wanted to feel the land beneath his feet, listen to the quiet hum of insects and the ripple of wind through the reeds. Everything seemed so clean on the surface. But underneath, the water hid more than dead fish. It hid truth. Ranger had known it first. Ranger had sensed something wrong when no one else did. Back at home, he poured himself a cup of coffee and sat with the documents, the camera feed, and the sound of Ranger breathing steadily at his feet. The photo of Rachel on the mantel watched him, her eyes kind but sharp, just like they were when she'd called out VA officers in their appeals hearing and refused to back down. You always said truth rises, even when people try to drown it. Jamal whispered to her memory. The next morning, his phone rang, unknown number. He answered with caution. "This is Mark Trevors," the voice said. "Environmental Compliance Division, your sample was..." "Interesting." Jamal leaned forward. "How bad?" "I can't say officially without authorization, but if that stuff had been poured into a public lake, someone's committing a felony." Jamal's heart pounded. "Can you send that in writing?" "Not yet, but I can suggest you keep documenting everything." He thanked the man, then hung up slowly, eyes narrowing. It was time to escalate. He emailed Meredith Stone requesting an open records review of all HOA lake maintenance activities. He copied Celeste. Then he waited. No reply. That night, he took Ranger on another walk, this time along the south path, and that's when he saw it. A white pickup parked at the far end, engine running, lights off, driver's side door ajar. The white pickup truck vanished before Jamal could close the distance, its engine growling as it reversed onto a side road and disappeared between rows of newly planted pines. But the impression it left was heavy, intentional, covert, and laced with the same energy as the midnight figure Meredith Stone had once been on camera. Jamal stood under the soft streetlight near the dock, fingers tightening around Ranger's leash, heart pumping with the precision calm of someone who'd spent years tracking threats with nothing but patience and instinct. That night, he uploaded the new footage from his trail cams, but they'd caught nothing. The truck had parked outside their frame, a blind spot. It wasn't coincidence, it was escalation. 2 days later, the strike came. Jamal returned from a grocery run to find a folded yellow paper pinned to his doorframe with a thumbtack. No envelope, no seal, just a note printed in bold, oversized type. URGAF safety report. Doak had occurred near Lot 9B. Ranger allegedly lunging at and biting a resident named Trevor Lane, age 57, during an early morning walk. The fine? Pending investigation. Immediate action recommended. Temporary removal of the animal from Brookhaven Ridge for the peace and protection of others. Jamal scanned the paper for evidence, photos, statements, timestamps. Nothing. No HOA contact, no legal backing. Just a signature line. Brookhaven Ridge Compliance Division. Jamal had never heard of that name before. Later that afternoon, he received a call from his neighbor 2 houses down. A quiet man named Kieran who mostly kept to himself, but had once offered Jamal an extension cord when the power flickered. "You might want to see this," Kieran said, his voice low. "They're talking about your dog at the clubhouse." Jamal arrived 10 minutes later, uninvited. He parked across the street and approached the wide glass windows of the community center slowly, Ranger by his side, leash short. Inside, half a dozen residents sat in a semicircle of folding chairs. Celeste stood near the front, flanked by Meredith Stone and a man Jamal didn't recognize. On the whiteboard behind them, someone had written, "Safety Measures Q1 Proposal." Below it, in red marker, "Animal Incidents 2 this month." Jamal didn't walk in. He stood just outside the glass, phone in hand, and recorded. He zoomed in as Celeste spoke. "We're not accusing anyone directly," she said, voice even and careful. "But if certain animals present a repeated concern, we are within our rights to request relocation or pursue legal pathways if necessary." Meredith chimed in, "It's not just about behavior, it's about the impression of danger. Some of our seniors don't feel safe walking anymore." A woman raised her hand. "Is this about that big black shepherd? The soldier's dog?" Celeste hesitated for a breath too long. "We have received a formal statement. The resident involved is recovering. Medical attention was administered." That was the final straw. Jamal stepped into the room, every head turning. "Funny," he said, calm and measured, "because that resident's incident is on my camera and my dog was never off leash." The silence was sharp. Celeste blinked, then recovered quickly. "Mr. Everett, this is a private community planning session. I live in this community," Jamal replied. "And if you're using my name and my dog to push a safety proposal, then I have the right to respond." From his jacket pocket, Jamal pulled out a flash drive and held it up. "This footage shows your victim approaching Ranger, snapping his fingers at him, making sudden movements, and then falling backwards into a shrub. Ranger never touched him, never even barked." Celeste's lips pursed. Meredith shifted uncomfortably. "I've shared this footage with my lawyer," Jamal added, "and I've filed a preemptive notice of defamation. If anyone distributes false information about Ranger again, I'll escalate this publicly and legally." He turned without waiting for a reply. That night, a new letter arrived, this time in a pristine envelope, printed on what looked like legal letterhead, marked URJM, Legal Counsel Communication. Jamal opened it cautiously. "To Mr. Jamal Everett. Immediate termination of dangerous animal residency." The letter, allegedly from a firm called Crandall and Marks, demanded that Ranger be removed within 72 hours or face mandatory seizure under Code 27AB of Neighborhood Safety Statute, HOA Series 12. It claimed legal authority to issue binding action and implied cooperation with local law enforcement. But Jamal saw the cracks immediately. Words were misspelt, registering as no contact number, no license number, no reference case, no legal statute in Georgia law even matched 27A. He called the County Bar Association. No record of any firm named Crandall and Marks. No practicing lawyers by those names in the state registry. It was a fake, a bluff, a bad one. The next day, Jamal walked into the Brookhaven HOA office building, a sterile room tucked inside the clubhouse with frosted glass and fake plants in every corner. A young woman at the desk looked up as he entered. "Yes?" Jamal said, voice low. "I'm here to file a formal complaint for harassment and falsification of legal documents by someone on the HOA board." She blinked. "Sir, you'll need to speak with Mrs. Whitmore for that." "Oh, I intend to," he said. He handed over a packet. Still images of the fake letter, annotated screenshots from the board meeting, copies of the footage, and a notarized statement of the timeline. As he left, Ranger at his side, several residents standing outside the pickleball courts nodded at him. One, an older woman with a sun hat and gardening gloves, murmured, "They're pushing too far. About time someone stood up." He didn't smile. He couldn't. Not yet. 2 nights later, while reviewing camera footage from his perimeter cams, Jamal caught something new. Not a figure this time, not a truck, but a sound. Footsteps. Close, then a faint click. His back gate latch opening. He paused the video, rewound. Ranger, asleep on the porch, suddenly lifted his head and growled. The gate moved slowly inward. Someone had come in. Jamal froze the frame. The figure wore HOA windbreaker, and in their hand, they carried a small, unlabeled bottle. Jamal didn't sleep the night he saw the figure enter his backyard with a bottle in hand. He replayed the footage again and again, studying every frame, every motion. The way the person moved, methodical, familiar, unhurried. The gate creaked open at 3:14 a.m. The figure stayed near the edge of the yard, knelt by the fence bordering the lake trail, and poured a thin stream of liquid into the soil. Not once did they look toward the house. Not once did they pause. And then they left, the latch clicking shut behind them like punctuation at the end of a threat. Jamal downloaded the footage, encrypted it, and copied it to 2 separate drives. The next morning, he moved like a man at war. No confrontation, no letters, just quiet execution of a plan he'd been outlining for weeks, but now accelerated with ruthless clarity. He drove 2 counties over and met with a corporate attorney recommended by his old commander, who specialized in LLC formation with anonymity clauses and real estate acquisition shielding. Within 48 hours, Shepherd's Watch LLC was born, registered in Delaware, tied to a mailbox forwarding service in South Carolina, and structured under a 3-tier shell system that removed Jamal's name from any public record. It would take a forensic team or a federal subpoena to track it back to him, and even then they'd only find more paperwork. With the entity secured, he began the second phase, contacting Clearstone Property Group, the lake's real owner. It took 3 emails, 2 phone calls, and a LinkedIn message to get through to someone who mattered, a tired-sounding asset manager named Tom Branson, who answered his call on a Wednesday afternoon with a wary, "You're not another HOA person, are you?" Jamal smiled. Quite the opposite. He introduced himself not as Jamal Everett, but as the acquisition director for Shepherd's Watch LLC, an investment group interested in underutilized recreational spaces with conservation potential. He made no reference to Brookhaven Ridge, HOA disputes, or anything that might smell like drama. "We believe the lake parcel has long-term ecological value," he said. "He'd like to make an offer." Quietly, Tom didn't hesitate. "Send it in writing. You're already ahead of Celeste Whitmore. She's still trying to secure financing." Jamal blinked. "She's already made an offer?" "Lowball," Tom replied, "and conditional. But honestly, we'd rather work with someone who isn't trying to bulldoze it into townhomes." That night, Jamal drafted the offer. $350,000, 0 cents in cash, closing in under 10 business days, environmental stewardship commitments optional, no zoning changes required. He had the funds between Rachel's life insurance, his military savings, and a silent investor he trusted with his life, and he was ready to use them. But then fate threw something unexpected. It was a Saturday morning, cool and bright, the lake shimmering under late spring sunlight, and Jamal had taken Ranger out early to avoid stares. They walked near the dock just as a group of children arrived, some with parents, others part of a youth therapy group from the nearby wellness center. One boy, maybe 8 or 9, broke from the group and sprinted toward the edge of the dock. His gait was awkward, unbalanced. His hands flapped slightly. Jamal noticed, instinctively reading the signs. The boy's mother shouted, "Mason, wait!" But the boy didn't stop. Instead, he kept running, shoes pounding the wood planks, until suddenly he tripped over a loose board and tumbled headfirst into the lake. The splash was loud. The group screamed. The water swallowed him instantly. Jamal didn't have to speak. Ranger was already moving. The shepherd launched forward with the precision of years of canine training, leaping from the bank into the lake with 0 hesitation. Jamal ran behind him, eyes locked on the churning spot where the boy had vanished. Within seconds, Ranger's head surfaced, then Mason's, clutched gently in Ranger's jaws by the boy's jacket collar, head above water, legs kicking. The dog paddled hard, pushing toward the shore. Jamal waded in and pulled Mason the rest of the way. The boy coughed, sputtered, then started sobbing into his mother's arms as Ranger shook out his coat nearby, tail wagging, eyes alert but calm. Someone filmed the whole thing. By that afternoon, the video had been shared on 3 local Facebook groups, retweeted by a city council member, and uploaded to TikTok with the caption, "Veteran's dog saves autistic boy from drowning Brookhaven Lake hero." The story caught fire. By Monday, a regional news crew had shown up at Jamal's house. He refused interviews, but they ran the story anyway. "The dog's name is Ranger," the newscaster said over footage of the rescue, owned by local resident Jamal Everett, a retired canine handler. Sources say the HOA had previously targeted the dog in a series of community disputes. The backlash was immediate. Residents who'd once averted their gaze now waved from their driveways. Someone left a handwritten thank you card on Jamal's doorstep. No signature. The woman with the sun hat from the pickleball court baked him a pie and brought it over herself, hands shaking slightly. "I didn't know," she said. "I'm sorry." But Celeste knew. Jamal saw her car parked outside the HOA office that evening, and for the first time, she didn't make eye contact as he passed. That night, he logged into the Shepherd's Watch LLC portal, reviewed the signed response from Clearstone confirming preliminary acceptance, and uploaded the final purchase documents. Then he turned off his laptop, sat beside Ranger, and scratched the dog behind the ears. "You saved a life today," he said quietly. "Time to save something bigger." At 3:11 a.m., a new motion alert pinged on his phone. Camera 2 north side, near the old maintenance gate. Jamal opened the live feed and watched as a figure stepped into frame. This time, they didn't pour anything, they knelt. And Doug, the figure who knelt by the maintenance gate under cover of darkness, remained in frame for nearly 3 minutes, their gloved hands scraping at the dirt, uncovering what looked like a buried metal case no larger than a toolbox. Jamal watched from his phone, eyes narrowed, recording the entire feed. The person moved with practiced speed, as if they'd done this before, retrieving a sealed envelope from the box and replacing it with something new before reburying it and disappearing into the shadows. Jamal saved the footage and labeled it Burial Exchange 3:11 AF Celeste Suspect. That morning, he didn't go to work. He didn't take Ranger for the usual walk around the lake. Instead, he drove to the library and requested the archived HOA newsletters from the past 5 years. It was time to dig his own kind of dirt. In the March 2020 newsletter, on the back page beneath a section called Community Enrichment Partners, he found it. A small photo, nearly forgettable, showed Celeste standing in front of a white banner that read, Noble Paw Academy, Premier Canine Excellence. The blurb beneath it said, "We're proud to announce our partnership with Noble Paw Academy, the Southeast's leading provider of elite canine behavior training. Thanks to their generous grant, Brookhaven Ridge will be introducing new pet access guidelines to better reflect the values of our neighborhood." Jamal's blood went cold. Noble Paw was no local pet school. He remembered the name from Rachel's research before they'd adopted Ranger, an overpriced franchise that marketed itself as behavioral luxury for urban elite dog owners. Jamal pulled out his phone and searched. In the company's investor release from 2021, Noble Paw boasted community partnerships in exclusive neighborhoods, citing Brookhaven Ridge as a pilot location where breed-based behavioral policies were successfully implemented. In plain language, they paid Celeste, and in return, she kicked out dogs like Ranger. Jamal printed the newsletter and cross-referenced campaign finance records. No direct donation existed under Celeste's name, but Meredith Stone's real estate firm Stone & Hart Realty had accepted a $25,000 0-cents consulting fee from Noble Paw's Community Integration Fund. The date matched the week the new dog restrictions were proposed. It was enough to blow the lid off, but fate wasn't done revealing. Later that afternoon, while walking Ranger near the north edge of the lake, Jamal passed an elderly man sitting on a bench with a thermos and a walking stick carved with military insignia. The man squinted at Ranger, then pointed. "That your dog?" Jamal nodded. "He is." The man leaned closer. "Name's Don." He extended a weathered hand. "I used to live on Sickup condos. You're new here?" 2 months, Jamal replied. Don't tapped the side of his thermos. Used to be a plaque down by the lake, bronze thing, dedicated to canine rescue units. My old girl Bailey, she was on it. Lost her in 9, cancer from sniffing wreckage in Oklahoma. Jamal felt a chill creep up his spine. Plaque's not there anymore. Jamal scoffed. Yeah, Whitmore had it taken down last spring. Said it didn't align with the updated community image. I told her to stuff her image. Jamal crouched down beside Ranger and asked softly, "You remember who else was on the plaque?" Don looked up. There were 7, 3 from Tornado Response, 2 from Urban SAR, 1 military. I remember because it had a stripe beside the name Ranger, it said. That wouldn't be him, would it? Jamal's heart stuttered. He pulled out his phone and showed Don a photo of Ranger in uniform, vest bearing his name and insignia. The old man stared for a long time before nodding. Damn, he's still alive. I thought. His voice trailed off. Jamal stood silently as Ranger sat patiently beside him. tongue out, tail flicking in the grass. For a moment, the world quieted. She erased them, Jamal said finally. She erased all of them. Some people think looking perfect is more important than remembering who kept you safe. That evening, Jamal went home and searched the HOA board meeting minutes from the spring of last year. In a line buried beneath landscape modifications, he found it. Approval for removal of bronze memorial structure from Lakeside Trail past 4-1. Reason? Obstructs design cohesion for upgraded aesthetics. No vote from the residents. No public notice. Just deleted. He scanned the minutes again. The lone dissenting vote. Someone named S. Duskland. Jamal searched the HOA roster. Sapphira Duskland board member since 2018, listed with no photo, no contact info. But her address was in the resident directory. Jamal made a note to visit. By midnight, the video of Rangers Lake Rescue had hit 30,000 views. People from out of state were commenting, sharing it with hashtags like. Jamal noticed something else. Anonymous tips beginning to appear in his inbox. One message included a scanned letter, handwritten HOA notes from a disgruntled former admin, referencing a Noble Paw performance clause and a residential compliance target threshold. Another included photos from a year ago, showing the canine memorial before it was removed. 7 dogs, including Ranger, etched into bronze. Jamal stared at his dog sleeping on the rug, wondering how long it had taken for people like Celeste to decide some memories weren't convenient anymore. The next day, he printed flyers, "Where's the Canine Memorial?" with a side-by-side photo of the plaque and Ranger in uniform. He posted them at the dog park, the lake gate, and the clubhouse bulletin board. By evening, they were all gone, ripped down. But he'd expected that. The same night, someone slipped an envelope under his front door. No return address. Inside were 3 pages of board emails, leaked anonymously, with internal conversations between Celeste, Meredith, and a third board member discussing the plaque removal. One line stood out. "If people want to honor mutts, they can do it somewhere else. We need clean, controlled, visible breeds, ones people are proud to walk." The wind picked up that night as Jamal stood at the kitchen window, watching the lake ripple under the moonlight. Ranger, silent at his feet, stared in the same direction, as if both of them could sense the shift in the neighborhood's air, like a long-held breath about to be exhaled. The leaked documents had rattled more than just Jamal. They had begun to spread. Residents who had once kept their heads down were now quietly talking at backyard fences, in parking lots and grocery store aisles, whispers of corruption, of erasure, of manipulation. And then something happened that Jamal hadn't expected. Not yet. Not so soon. At the next HOA board meeting, a routine monthly affair that usually ended with budget updates and garden color palettes, one of the board members stood up. Sapphira Duskland, the name Jamal had found buried in the meeting minutes, the sole dissenting vote on the canine memorial. She rose slowly, a printed folder in her hands, and addressed the room with a voice that was steady but tense. "Before we begin," she said, "I'd like to clarify something regarding a vote I was recorded as supporting last spring." The board shifted uncomfortably. Celeste narrowed her eyes. "We can add comments in the closing section, Ms." But Sapphira didn't sit. She turned to face the residents in the room. "The removal of the memorial plaque was never explained to me. I was handed a stack of papers with highlighted signature lines and told it was standard landscaping approval. When I asked for time to read them, I was told I was being..." Murmurs stirred through the audience. She continued, voice rising just slightly. "I now realize the language in those documents authorized the demolition of a veteran's canine tribute. I was not given full disclosure, and when I expressed concern after the fact, I was told by Mrs. Whitmore that it would be best if I didn't make waves, especially if I ever wanted to stay on the board." Celeste's expression didn't change, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped her clip. "That's a serious accusation, Sapphira." "It's the truth," Sapphira replied, "and I think this board should be subject to an audit, not just for transparency but for accountability." The room erupted not into shouting but into low, electric murmurs. Residents exchanged looks. One woman began typing on her phone. Jamal, seated in the back row, said nothing. He only nodded once, slightly, when Sapphira's gaze flicked toward him for the briefest second. The next morning, an email landed in Jamal's inbox from an anonymous sender using a burner Gmail address. Brookhaven Voice 187. The subject line read, "You should see this before the board meeting next week." The message body was empty except for one attachment. A PDF. Jamal scanned it quickly, then again more slowly as bile rose in his throat. The document was a proposal drafted by a consulting firm called Green Slate Design, addressed to Brookhaven Ridge HOA Planning Committee, at Celeste Whitmore. The header read, "Concept Development Lakeview Canine Spa and Wellness Retreat." The rest of the document laid out a disturbingly clear vision: a premium spa for dogs to be constructed along the lake's southern perimeter, featuring filtered wading pools, climate-adjuning suites, a private off-leash relaxation garden, and an adjoining cafe for owners. The price tag exceeded $2 million, 0 cents, to be raised through a combination of special HOA assessments and strategic investor partnerships. But what hit Jamal hardest was buried on page 5, an operational clause titled, "Admission Guidelines." The text read, "In order to preserve a calm and exclusive environment for our members and their pets, the facility shall not accept animals classified as military or rescue service breeds, including but not limited to German Shepherds, Belgian Malinois, Dobermans, or any dog with visible injury, prosthetic, or training history related to combat or disaster relief." Jamal stared at the sentence for a full minute, his pulse hammering in his ears. They weren't just excluding Ranger, they were erasing his kind. He printed the document, highlighted the clause in red, and added it to his growing binder. This wasn't about safety, it was about image. Celeste wanted a curated community, a place where everything looked clean, controlled, and easy to sell. Service animals didn't fit that picture. Scars didn't fit that picture. Ranger's missing toe, the silver patch in his fur, the small limp in his gait when it got cold. All of it made people uncomfortable, not because it was dangerous, but because it was real. Jamal didn't cry. He'd stopped crying the day Rachel took her last breath, when he held her hand as her monitor went flat. But the emotion that built in his chest now was just as sharp, just as cold. He composed an email and sent it to 5 trusted residents. People who'd thanked him quietly, supported him subtly, passed him folded notes and screenshots under the radar. He titled the message, "The Spa They Don't Want You to Know About." Within an hour, screenshots were posted on the unofficial Brookhaven Ridge Facebook group. Within 3, they were on Nextdoor. By sunset, the document had reached a local animal rescue organization, which posted a scathing response calling the proposal eliticist, discriminatory, and a slap in the face to every dog that has ever pulled someone from rubble or sniffed out danger in the dark. The backlash began to snowball. Comments flooded every community channel. Someone spray-painted Ranger deserved better in chalk along the lake trail. An anonymous resident posted a video montage of Ranger's rescue footage, cut with stills from the spa proposal, and overlaid it with the words, "They tried to ban a hero." HOA leadership went quiet. Celeste issued no statement, but Sapphira resigned from the board that night, publicly posting a letter that ended with the words, "I was lied to. I was used. I won't be part of it anymore." Jamal received another email, this one with no subject, no name. It contained a single photograph: Celeste in a blazer shaking hands with a man in a Noble Paul polo shirt, both of them standing in front of a sign that read, "Lakeview Project Phase 1, Summer 2023. He printed it, placed it in the binder, and flipped to the last empty page. Then he stood, turned off the lights, and walked out to the porch where Ranger waited, silent and watchful as always. The night was warm, but the air felt heavy. A storm was coming. The binder was full now. Documents, emails, photographs, highlighted lines of betrayal and prejudice, signed approvals cloaked in euphemisms and clauses that stripped value from those who had once stood between life and death for others. Jamal closed it slowly, set it down on the kitchen table beside a mug of untouched coffee, and stared at the printout from Clearstone Properties. The header read, "Final Sale Agreement Parcel 811 Brookhaven Lake." Beneath it, the buyer name, Shepherd's Watch LLC. Purchase price, $350,000, 0 cents. Terms, immediate ownership transfer upon environmental clearance, which had passed the week before. Jamal was now the legal owner of the lake. Every ripple, every cattail, every inch of soil within 10 feet of its edge. And no one knew it was him yet. He had signed through legal proxies, used silent intermediaries, transferred funds in precise tranches, all while the HOA still believed he was simply a disgruntled veteran with a dog too rough around the edges for their curated cul-de-sacs. That night, with the sale finalized and the deed processed through the county registrar, Jamal walked to the lake just after 11 p.m., Ranger at his side. The water was calm, catching moonlight like it had no idea what war had just been fought beneath its surface. Jamal sat on the dock, legs dangling over the edge boots, resting above the dark reflection. Ranger lay beside him, ears back, head on his paws. They didn't speak, they didn't need to. The silence between them carried 15 years of shared breath, shared danger, shared loss. Rachel would have sat right here, one hand on Ranger's back, the other in Jamal's. She would have said something like, "You just changed the game, baby," and smiled that tired smile of hers, the one she wore after her chemo rounds when everything hurt, but she still wanted him to believe it would be okay. Jamal stayed until the air turned cold and the streetlights blinked off one by one. Then he stood, placed his hand on Ranger's collar and said, "It's time." 1 week later, the HOA sent out glossy invitations for an exclusive community presentation. Ven Lake Bark Lounge, new chapter for Brookhaven Lake. The flyer boasted luxury design renderings, promised lakeside elegance, and included a photo of a woman in yoga pants holding a miniature poodle beside a modern patio bar, with the tagline, "Because our dogs deserve better." They still didn't know. Not Celeste, not Meredith, not any of the board members who had voted to replace memory with marketing, integrity with investment. The event was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon, held at the community pavilion overlooking the lake. A full crowd was expected, wine, horse dovers, live acoustic music. Jamal wore his cleanest dress shirt, dark jeans, and polished boots. He brought the binder, and he brought Ranger. The two of them walked the long path toward the pavilion, with the same gait they had used approaching forward operating bases in Afghanistan. A light, measured, unshaken. As Jamal reached the gathering, he stood just beyond the crowd, listening. Celeste was already on stage, a microphone in hand, her voice as smooth as ever. "We envision a space of harmony," she said, gesturing toward a large easel with printed renderings, "where pets and owners alike can enjoy the serenity of our lake without disruption or concern. The Ven Lake Bark Lounge will be members." Jamal stepped closer, Ranger calmly walking beside him. Celeste's voice continued, amplified across the green. "We're still in negotiations for final development rights, but I assure you Brookhaven is about to be elevated." Jamal cleared his throat once, then climbed the stage steps. The music stopped, conversations dropped to a hush. Celeste turned, blinking as if unsure whether she should smile or call security. "Mr. Everett," she said, clearly off script, "this is a closed presentation." Jamal took the microphone from its stand without asking. His voice was calm, steady, deep enough to carry across the lake. "Apologies for the interruption. I just thought the community deserved to know there won't be a Ven Lake Bark Lounge." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Celeste stepped forward. "I'm not sure you're qualified to speak on behalf of the development process." "You're right," Jamal cut in, meeting her gaze. "That right belongs to the owner of the lake, and as of last Thursday, that's me." Silence. A long, stunned, perfect silence. Celeste blinked. "That's impossible." Jamal reached into his bag and held up a certified copy of the deed. "Purchased through Shepherd's Watch LLC. Fully executed. Fully legal. Clearstone accepted our offer and transferred ownership. Effective immediately, this land and the lake it borders are no longer under HOA jurisdiction." A few people gasped. One man clapped just once, then stopped. Celeste was still processing the blow. "You manipulated the process," she said, her voice. "You circumvented community input." "You mean the same way the memorial was removed without a vote?" Jamal asked. "Or how you accepted private funding from Noblepaw to rewrite access laws?" That one landed. He saw it in her eyes. He turned to the crowd. "I don't want to fight. I didn't come here for revenge. But I will not stand by while you erase dogs like Ranger who saved lives because they don't match your brochure." He paused, eyes sweeping over the residents, many of whom were now staring at the renderings of the spa, uncomfortable. "This lake belongs to someone who respects service, sacrifice, and memory. It always should. He handed the microphone back to Celeste, nodded once, and stepped down. Ranger followed, tail steady, head high. Behind him, the crowd stayed silent, until someone said softly, "He's the one who saved that boy." Then, slowly, applause began to build. The weeks after Jamal's declaration unfolded like the quiet collapse of a broken dam. Not with explosion, but with weight giving way. The HOA retreating behind vague emails and awkward silence while residents slowly unhooked themselves from the illusion that they'd ever truly had control. Celeste resigned without fanfare, citing personal obligations and reputational strain. Her final email laced with veiled bitterness. Meredith vanished from local meetings and delisted her realty business within the month. The spy project disintegrated. No one brought it up again. But Jamal hadn't fought all this just to end something. He had always intended to begin something new. In the days that followed, he worked with veterans groups, dog handlers, rescue foundations, and even a retired landscape architect who volunteered to help with design. They didn't raise fences. They built paths. They didn't pour concrete for cafes. They laid stone circles for silent reflection, installed benches shaded by willows, planted wildflowers that spread instead of obeying. Jamal filed the name change quietly with the county clerk, then had it etched into bronze by the same company that once cast the plaque Celeste removed. The new one was larger, simpler, Ranger's Rest, a sanctuary for service human and canine, dedicated to those who gave all and those who carried them through. Word spread slowly at first, then all at once. The lake was no longer just a piece of contested property. It became a symbol. Articles ran, veterans showed up, children came to read beside the water with therapy dogs napping at their feet. Ranger was there for it all. Though his steps had grown slower, his once razor-precise movement now accompanied by a soft limp and clouded vision in one eye. Time had taken from him what war could not, but he still walked with dignity, still sat straight, still found Jamal's voice no matter how soft it spoke. On the day of the dedication ceremony, the clouds held off just long enough. Jamal stood at the small wooden podium near the dock, now rebuilt and extended into the water, with a wide ramp that allowed wheelchairs and service dogs to reach the center. Rows of chairs stretched out before him, filled with neighbors, veterans in uniform, children clutching small flags, and beside the podium, a hand-painted sign read, "Welcome to Ranger's Rest, open to all." He took a moment before speaking, eyes resting on Ranger, who lay beside the stand, wearing his old vests, not the black tactical gear of missions, but the soft tan canvas one Rachel had sewn for him back home. Jamal began, voice low, steady, every word landing like truth long waited for. A year ago, this lake was a battleground, not of bullets but of silence, of erasure, of fear disguised as rules. They told us who didn't belong. They drew lines in the grass, not with paint but with policy. He paused, scanning the faces, some teary, some proud. But Ranger never drew lines. He crossed them, in deserts, in wreckage, in hospitals, in parks. He didn't ask who deserved saving, he simply went. Jamal looked down then, reaching slowly toward his partner, now grayer in the face, one eye clouded with cataract, but still alert to the tone in his handler's voice. Ranger stood shakily, front legs stiff, but he rose. A cheer began from the children near the dock, then from the adults behind them. Ranger took 4 careful steps and climbed the small platform, standing beside Jamal beneath the new sign. The noise quieted. Jamal looked at him, eyes wet, and knelt. He placed a hand on Ranger's head, rough palm against worn fur, and whispered not into the mic, but into the space where only truth fits. This place is for the ones who carried pain on their backs and never let it fall. It's for the ones with scars, both seen and hidden, and anyone who dares to call you dangerous. Jamal's voice cracked, then steadied. They've never known the weight of loyalty. Silence fell again, but it wasn't empty. It was reverent. Ranger sat, gently, as the wind rustled through the leaves, carrying the sound of water lapping against the dock and the murmured prayers of old men in uniform. One child stepped forward, then another, until a small group encircled Ranger, resting hands gently on his back, his flank, his chest, asking nothing, just being near. The sun broke through the clouds then, casting gold across the lake that had once been a battleground, now transformed into a place of memory, healing, and belonging. A place with no gates, no judgment, no lines. Just rest. Rangers rest. If this story moved you even a little, consider subscribing to follow more stories like Rangers. It helps more than you think. And I'm curious, where are you watching from? Which part of the story hit you the hardest? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every one.